Will Zander had no idea that the night he borrowed his neighbor's tux would change his life. He was running late, of course. His 7-year-old son, Jace, had spilled orange juice all over his only clean shirt, and the sitter had texted 30 minutes ago saying she was stuck in traffic. But rent was overdue, groceries were low, and his truck needed new brakes, so when a friend offered him a one-night chauffeur gig for a private client, he couldn't afford to say no. "Jace, buddy, you got your backpack. Snacks, charger." Will knelt down, straightening his son's little hoodie. "Yeah, Dad, I'm good, don't worry, Miss Carla already said she's bringing me donuts." Jace grinned, missing one front tooth. "You look like James Bond." Will laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "More like James Broke." "Be good, okay?" He kissed Jace's forehead, watched him climb into Carla's car, and then jogged back to the black town car he was borrowing for the night. He adjusted the mirror, checked his tie slightly crooked but passable, and pulled up to the high rise where he was told to pick up the client. The woman who stepped out of the building wasn't what he expected. She wore a navy blue pantsuit that looked like it cost more than his rent, her dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, and her heels clicked sharply as she walked down the steps. But it wasn't just the designer clothes or the way she carried herself. It was her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and scanning him like she noticed everything. "You're not the usual driver," she said, pausing at the car door. Will opened it smoothly. "Last-minute replacement, ma'am." "Will Zander," she tilted her head. "Olivia Westwood, let's go." He circled back to the driver's seat, heart pounding. Olivia Westwood. The Olivia Westwood, CEO of Westwood Luxe, the billion-dollar fashion and lifestyle empire. He'd seen her on magazines, at the grocery store checkout line, her name whispered like royalty in the city. She was silent most of the ride, tapping something into a leather notebook. Will kept his eyes on the road, trying not to think about how many zeros were in her bank account or how good she smelled, like vanilla and something expensive he couldn't name. At her red light, she finally spoke. "You have a kid." His jaw tightened. "Yes, how old?" 7. "Jace," she nodded once. "You drop him off before the job?" "Yeah, my sitter's great." She said nothing else, but something in her tone had softened. When they arrived at the gala downtown, Olivia stepped out and turned to him. "Wait here." "I'll only be an hour." Will nodded, watching her stride into the building, cameras flashing as she entered. He leaned back in the seat, exhaling slowly. 1 hour. He could do this. But 45 minutes later, she came storming out of the building, heels in hand, hair now loose and wild around her shoulders. She yanked the door open and slid into the back seat. "Drive," she muttered. He didn't ask questions. Just started the engine and pulled away from the curb. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer for a minute. Then my ex-fiancé showed up with his new girlfriend, wearing one of my designs. Will glanced at her in the mirror. "Ouch." "Yeah," she rubbed her temple. "I needed to get out before I threw a glass of champagne in someone's face." He couldn't help it, he chuckled. She looked up. "What? Sorry, you don't seem like the kind of woman who runs from anything." Her lips twitched. "Normally I don't, but tonight I needed out, and—" "I'm glad it was you." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know me." "Exactly, that's kind of the point." They drove in silence for a few blocks before she spoke again. "Do you have anywhere you need to be?" He blinked. "No, why?" "Park by the lake. I need air, and—" "Company?" 15 minutes later, they were sitting side by side on a bench overlooking the water, the car parked a few feet away. Olivia had kicked off her heels and was hugging her knees, the city lights shimmering over the lake. "I built everything from scratch," she said quietly. "Westwood Luxe. 10 years of no sleep, no dating, no trust, and he was supposed to be different, but he cheated. With my assistant." Will's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," she glanced at him. "You have anyone?" He shook his head. "Jace's mom left when he was 2, said she wasn't cut out for motherhood. Haven't had time to date since." She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "You raised him alone." "Yeah, it's not easy, but he's everything." She smiled, just a little. "That's rare." They sat in silence again, the night air cool around them. "Why are you driving?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated. "Lost my job last month, been picking up whatever I can. This gig pays well, even if it's just one night." She turned to face him. "I could use a driver, full-time, someone I can trust." He blinked. "You serious?" She nodded. You didn't ask questions, you didn't push, and you didn't treat me like I was made of gold. I like that. Will hesitated. What about your company, your board? They can deal with it. I make the final call. He smiled slowly. Then yeah. I'm in. She looked down at her bare feet, then back up at him. One more thing. Yeah, I don't usually do this, but would you have dinner with me? Not tonight, but soon. His heart skipped. Like a date, he grinned. Yeah. I'd like that. And in that moment, under the city lights, something shifted between them, something real. Neither of them said it, but they both felt it. Something big had just begun. The first morning of Will's new job started with a knock on his apartment door at 6 sharp. He was still tying his shoes when Jace peeked through the blinds. There's a guy outside. He's holding a box and wearing gloves, Jace said, voice full of suspicion. We'll open the door to find a man in a slate gray uniform and cap holding a white garment box with a crisp black ribbon. For Mr. Zander, the man said, handing it over. We'll sign the clipboard with a confused frown, then brought the box inside. Jace watched as he pulled off the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside lay a tailored black suit, a white dress shirt, and a narrow charcoal tie, every inch of it clearly custom. Jace reached out to touch the fabric. Whoa, a small card lay on top. In neat handwriting it read, "If you're going to drive me, you should at least look like you belong behind the wheel, Olivia." Will stared at it, lips parted. Guess I'm not wearing my borrowed tux again. Jace grinned. You're fancy now. He dropped Jace off at Carla's on the way and arrived at Olivia's penthouse precisely at 7. A valet waved him through the underground garage, and an elevator attendant greeted him without surprise, like chauffeurs were a regular part of the building's ecosystem. Olivia was already waiting in the lobby, speaking into a tiny earpiece, pacing with sharp efficiency. Her blazer today was dove gray, her heels a shade darker. She didn't glance at him until the call ended. You clean up well, she said, stepping into the car. Will adjusted his new cuff. You didn't have to do this. You looked like a man trying to disappear, she said flatly. That's not useful when you're driving me. They rode in silence for several blocks until she asked, What's your schedule like after 6? Will glanced at her in the mirror. I pick up Jace from Carla's. Why? I have a benefit dinner tonight. My usual +1 bailed last minute. I need someone who won't cause a scandal. He laughed, surprised. You want me to come to a billionaire fundraiser? I want someone who won't try to sell my photo to a tabloid, she said. And you're the only one I know who doesn't care about my money. He didn't answer right away. What would I wear? I'll handle that. Later that evening, a different driver dropped off a tuxedo, this one midnight blue with satin lapels. Jace clapped when Will stepped out of his room. Are you going to marry the lady? Will blinked. What? No, it's just dinner. She sent you clothes twice and told you to come to a party. That's marrying stuff. Will tried not to laugh. Finish your homework. I'll be back by 10. Carla's staying until I get home. He arrived at the event slightly early, as instructed. The venue was a sprawling glass-walled rooftop with a panoramic view of the skyline. Waiters in white gloves passed trays of champagne and lobster bites, and every guest looked like they'd stepped off a runway. Will felt like a statue, standing near the entrance in the tux Olivia picked, trying not to fidget. Then she walked in. This time, her gown was black with a high neckline and a cut that made the crowd part without her saying a word. Her hair was swept back in a style that made her cheekbones look like sculpture. When she reached him, her eyes skimmed him from head to toe. You clean up better than most of the men here. You sure you want to be seen with your driver? I'm sure I want to be seen with someone who knows how to listen. They mingled, and Olivia introduced him simply as Will Zander. No mention of job titles, no awkward explanations. If people noticed he wasn't part of their world, they didn't say it, though some raised brows lingered a little too long. At one point, a silver-haired man stepped beside Olivia, leaning in with a practiced smile. Liv, darling. You've been avoiding me. I've been busy running a company, she replied coolly. The man turned to Will. And who's this? Olivia's voice didn't waver. Someone who doesn't need a private jet to matter. Will watched the man blink, then awkwardly excuse himself. After the man left, Will leaned closer. Friend of yours, board member. He's been trying to push me into a merger for 2 years. You always this charming at dinner parties, she laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her all night. Only when cornered. Later, as they stood near the railing overlooking the city, Will noticed her hands tightening on the stem of her glass. You okay? Her eyes stayed on the skyline. There's a board meeting tomorrow. They want to vote on removing me as CEO. Will turned toward her. Why? Because I walked away from a merger that would have made them all richer, but it would have gutted what I built. He didn't say anything for a beat. Then, you're not going to let them win. She looked at him then, really looked. You speak like you've fought your own battles. I have. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just full of things not yet said. Then she stepped closer, voice lower. I didn't bring you here for decoration. Will raised an eyebrow. No, I brought you because you're the only person in my life right now who doesn't want something from me. He paused, then said, That's not entirely true. She tilted her head slightly. I want you to win. And I want you to know you don't have to do it alone. For a moment, her expression flickered, not fragile, but exposed. Then she looked down at her glass and exhaled. Let's get out of here. They left without saying goodbye to anyone, her hand brushing his as they stepped into the elevator. Neither of them pulled away. The next morning, Will stood quietly in Olivia's office, not because he was uncertain, but because the room itself demanded it. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, but it was the quiet intensity of the space that struck him most. No clutter, no distractions. Everything with a purpose like her. She didn't greet him right away. Instead, she gestured for him to take a seat across from her desk while she finished reviewing a file. Her hair was pinned back today, not a strand out of place, and she wore a soft cream blouse beneath a fitted blazer the color of steel. The only sound in the room was the subtle flipping of pages. When she finally looked up, her eyes locked onto his with something unreadable. I need your help with something, she said. Will leaned forward slightly. You're not exactly short on staff. This isn't about staff, she replied. It's about someone I trust. She tapped a document on her desk and pushed it toward him. This is a background file on one of my board members. I think he's been working behind my back to secure a hostile buyout. He's hosting a private event tonight. I wasn't invited. Will looked at the paper but didn't touch it. You want me to get in? I want you to be my eyes. You won't be there as my driver. I've arranged for you to get invited as a potential investor. He blinked. You want me to pretend to be rich. You'll be wearing a three-piece Tom Ford suit and arriving in a Maybach. No one will question it. Don't these people do research? Not when they're blinded by their own egos, she said. And you'll be under a different name, William Cross. You'll be introduced by one of my allies who owes me a favor. Will leaned back in the chair, absorbing the weight of it. You're asking me to spy. I'm asking you to observe and report discreetly. Why me? Because you don't belong to their world, she said. And because I trust your instincts. Will studied her for a long moment. You're not used to trusting people. No, she said simply. Then why start now? She hesitated. Because I've watched you make hard decisions without hesitation, and because you've never once asked me for anything. He exhaled and stood. All right, I'll do it. That night, he stood in front of a mirror in a penthouse suite he'd only seen in movies. The suit fit like it was sewn onto him, and the watch on his wrist, something Olivia had arranged on loan, ticked with intimidating precision. He barely recognized himself. The event was held in the penthouse of a luxury building Will hadn't even known existed, perched on a hill overlooking the river. When he arrived, a valet opened the car door with a nod of deference that made his skin crawl. He stepped into the foyer and was immediately greeted by a tall man with a silver pin on his lapel. Mr. Cross, we've been expecting you, Mr. Talbot is eager to meet you. Inside, the party was more exclusive than any gala he'd seen before. No press, no photographers, just men and women in suits murmuring in corners, glasses of scotch in hand, deals being made with nods instead of signatures. Will kept his tone easy, his movements deliberate. He was introduced to Talbot within minutes. The man was in his 60s with pale eyes and a voice like gravel. I hear you're looking to diversify, Talbot said, handing Will a glass. I hear you're looking to consolidate, Will replied with a calm smile. Talbot chuckled. Blunt, I like that. What's your interest in Westwood Lux? It's undervalued, Will said smoothly. And I have a long-term appetite. Talbot studied him carefully. Most of us want short-term gain. I don't, Will said. I like the integrity of brands that still mean something. Talbot's lips twitched. You'd get along with Olivia. I hope so, Will replied, but I hear she's losing her grip. That got the response he needed. Talbot's eyes narrowed just for a second and then he leaned in. She built the empire, but she's too married to the past. Sometimes we need to burn the foundation to build higher. Will raised his glass. Careful. Some foundations fight back. Talbot clinked his glass with Will's, then turned casually. Enjoy the evening, Mr. Cross. Will slipped away, heart thudding harder than he let show. He mingled, listened, picked up names and dates. He caught references to a vote being rushed, a signature forged, a clause buried in a contract that would strip Olivia of her controlling shares. It was all there just quiet enough to pass below the radar. By the time he returned to the car parked a block away, he already knew what he'd say to her. Back at her penthouse, Olivia opened the door herself. Her expression was unreadable, but tension sat in her shoulders. Will handed her the small leather notepad he'd carried in his jacket pocket. Everything they said, everyone involved, you were right. He's the center of it. She flipped through the pages, eyes scanning fast. When she reached the end, she closed the book and looked up at him. I was going to fight him alone. You're not alone anymore, Will said quietly. She stepped back, leaving the door open. He entered slowly, unsure what she wanted from him now, but then she turned, her voice low. I don't let people in. I don't know how to be soft. You don't need to be soft, he said. You just need someone who sees you, all of you. She closed the distance between them, her breath shaky. I see you too, Will, and I don't care that you're not part of this world. He reached for her hand gently. You brought me into it. I didn't expect to want you to stay. I didn't expect to want to. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. She leaned in first. He met her halfway. And when their lips touched, it wasn't tentative. It was like dammed-up emotion finally flooding loose. Every warning, every wall, every reason not to feel this crashed in that kiss. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested lightly against his. I have to win this, she whispered. You will, he promised, and I'll be right beside you when you do. Neither of them said the word love. Not yet, but it was there waiting just beneath the surface. Will stood just inside Olivia's office, watching as she placed the final document into a leather folder and closed it with a quiet, decisive snap. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting gold over the room's clean lines and sharp edges. The board meeting was in 1 hour, and the air between them was taut with everything unsaid. She turned to him, eyes sharp but steady. You ready? I'm not the one walking into a room full of people who want to gut my company. No, she said, reaching for her coat. But you're the one who gave me the weapon to stop them. They left together, stepping into the car without another word. The drive through the city was quiet but not tense. There was a calmness in Olivia now, something that hadn't been there before. As if the storm had already passed, she just had to walk into the room and let the lightning strike. When they arrived at the Westwood Lux headquarters, Will walked her to the glass doors but stopped short of going in. You sure you don't want me inside? He asked. She glanced at him, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. You will be, she said, pressing it into his hand. He raised a brow, but she was already walking away. Inside the envelope was a visitor's badge and a note in Olivia's handwriting. Your seat is next to mine. This time, I don't sit alone. A security guard ushered him through the private elevator, and within minutes, he found himself stepping into a sweeping boardroom. The long black table gleamed beneath recessed lighting, and 12 pairs of calculating eyes turned toward him as he entered. Olivia was already seated at the head of the table. She didn't smile, but she nodded once, and that was all the welcome he needed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Talbot cleared his throat from the far end of the room. Before we begin, I'd like the record to show that Mr. William Cross is not, to our knowledge, a shareholder. He's a guest, Olivia said, folding her hands. And he'll be staying. Talbot looked like he might object, but thought better of it. He turned to the documents in front of him. Very well, let's proceed. The meeting opened with dry numbers and dense reports, but Will's eyes never left Olivia. She listened, nodded occasionally, but said nothing until Talbot presented the final item on the agenda, a motion for a board vote to shift controlling authority to an interim executive panel. He slid a paper across the table. Standard restructuring. Nothing personal. Olivia leaned forward, her voice cool. You mean the panel you and your associates have been forming behind my back? Talbot's smile faltered. Olivia, this isn't about betrayal, it's about growth. She tapped the folder in front of her. Growth achieved through backroom deals and falsified signatures. Gasps rippled across the room. Talbot's eyes narrowed. You have no proof. I have records of your calls, she replied. Meeting notes, a copy of the forged authorization, and a statement from a witness. She opened the folder, laying out each page slowly, methodically. Talbot's face drained of color. The room went still. Unless anyone would like to explain why these documents bear my signature, despite me being in Tokyo on those dates, Olivia said, voice calm but lethal, I suggest we move to a different vote. Talbot stood abruptly, pushing back his chair. This is a farce. No, she said, rising. This is the end of your tenure. The silence that followed was broken only by the chairman clearing his throat. All in favor of retaining Miss Westwood as CEO and opening an ethics investigation into Mr. Talbot's activities. Every hand except Talbot's rose. Olivia turned to Will as the room erupted into quiet murmurs. He stood, walking to her side without hesitation. Talbot stormed out, shoving the door open behind him. After the meeting, Olivia didn't return to her office. Instead, she led Will to the private terrace above the executive floor. The city stretched out below, and the wind caught strands of her hair that had slipped free. She leaned on the railing, quiet for a long moment. It's over, she finally said. No, Will replied. It's just beginning. She turned to him, eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. I've spent years keeping people out, building walls, thinking I could do it all alone. You did more than most ever could, he said. But now you don't have to. She looked down, then back up. I want you to be in my life, not just as my driver or my. Whatever we've been calling this, he stepped closer. Say it, she smiled faintly. I'm in love with you. The words hit him with more force than expected. He didn't hesitate. I love you too, and that was it. No need for more. The weeks that followed moved fast. Olivia made good on her promise. Talbot was removed, and new board members were appointed with integrity. She introduced Will to her world not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. Not because of money or status, but because she chose him, and he chose her. Jace met her 3 weeks later over pancakes on a Saturday morning. He was skeptical at first, arms crossed and watching her like a tiny detective. But when she asked if he liked dinosaurs and then showed him a hand-drawn design of a T-Rex in a suit, he cracked a grin and never looked back. Will didn't move into her penthouse. Instead, Olivia visited his apartment often, insisting on learning to cook in his tiny kitchen and laughing when she burned toast. She didn't try to change his life, she simply became a part of it. One evening, after dinner at her rooftop garden she'd had transformed for the night with fairy lights and soft jazz, she handed him a small black box. Inside was a key to the penthouse. He asked. She shook her head. To my office, he laughed. You want me to be your assistant now? No, she said. I want you to be my partner, not just in life, in everything. He looked at the key, then at her, and nodded. You sure you want a guy who used to drive a beat-up pickup running a company? I don't want anyone else. And so they built something new together, not just a love story, a life. Will stood at the edge of the private runway, the early evening breeze tugging at his jacket as the jet door lowered with a soft mechanical hum. He hadn't known where Olivia was taking him until they arrived at the hangar, and she handed him a passport with his name newly embossed in gold. Barcelona, he asked, tilting the cover. You just finished a board review yesterday. She took his hand, her fingers warm against the cool evening air. Exactly. I'm done proving myself. For once, I want to just live. A black Bentley with tinted windows waited at the end of the tarmac in Spain, whisking them through narrow golden-lit streets to a restored villa just outside the city. The place was all weathered stone and climbing ivy, with iron balconies overlooking a grove of olive trees. Inside, warm candlelight flickered across the terracotta tiles, and a long wooden table had been set for two. A chef greeted them briefly with a nod before disappearing into the kitchen. Olivia kicked off her heels and stood barefoot on the cool tiles, her gaze softening as she looked around. I came here once when I was 22. I promised myself I'd buy it if I ever made it. Will traced the curve of her cheek with his thumb. You kept the promise. She turned to face him fully. I've kept every promise to myself, except the one where I stopped being afraid of needing someone. He stepped closer. You're not afraid anymore. I am, she said, voice low, but I want the fear. Because it means I finally care about something I might lose. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her in. You're not going to lose me. Dinner was slow and full of laughter, the kind that came from being fully present. They tried unfamiliar wines, tasted dishes neither could pronounce, and let the silence between them feel like belonging. Later, in the quiet of the villa, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers through her hair. My mother used to say luxury without love is just loneliness in silk. Will sat beside her, pulling her hand into his lap. What do you say? I say love makes everything feel earned. He kissed her shoulder, his voice low against her skin. Then I guess we've earned this. The next morning, they wandered through the market in the old quarter, blending in with tourists and locals. Olivia bartered for fresh figs in Spanish, laughed at Will's attempt to order coffee, and bought Jace a miniature leather football. They found a small bookstore tucked behind a bakery, and she disappeared into the poetry aisle until he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a book of Neruda. This one, she said, handing him the open page. Read it. He took it from her and read aloud, his voice quiet. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. She looked up at him. That's exactly how this feels. They returned home 2 days later, sun-kissed and rested. Carla waved them in from the porch where Jace sat building something elaborate with blocks. He jumped up the second he saw them. You were gone for, like 100 hours. Will scooped him up. We brought you something. Jace opened the bag Olivia handed him and pulled out the football. That's awesome. Olivia crouched next to him. Want me to teach you how to do a proper throw? He blinked. You know how to play. I was quarterback in high school, she said, straight-faced. Will raised an eyebrow. You were. No, she admitted, smiling. But I watched a lot of games. That night, after Jace was asleep and the house was quiet, Will stepped onto the balcony where Olivia stood with a glass of wine, her gaze on the skyline. I've been thinking, he said, sliding his arms around her waist from behind. About the next step, she leaned back into him. There's more. There's always more when it's with you. She turned to face him, setting her glass down. Tell me. I want to build something of my own, not just ride along with what you've created. I've got ideas. A design brand focused on affordable, sustainable pieces, and I want to name it after my mom. Olivia's expression lit with something deeper than pride. That's beautiful. I hoped you'd say that, because I want you to be my partner, not just in love, in this. She didn't hesitate. Then let's build it. They started small, one collection, 6 pieces, all made with reclaimed materials. Olivia refused to let him use her money. This is yours, she said. I'll invest my time, my name if you want it, but the vision, that stays yours. The pieces sold out in 4 days. Word of mouth became buzz. Buzz became press. Will's name started to appear in articles, not as Olivia Westwood's partner, but as the founder of something new. One evening, after a shoot for the next campaign, Will found Olivia sitting on the floor of their new shared apartment, flipping through a stack of old family photos he had finally unpacked. She held up one of him and Jace on a beach, both sunburned and smiling. I want more of these. We'll make them, he said. She looked up. I mean it, not just moments, a life with you, with Jace, with a home that doesn't feel like a fortress. He sat beside her, took her face in his hands, and said the only thing that needed saying. Marry me. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She just nodded, tears pooling quietly. Yes, they didn't do a grand wedding. Instead, they married in a garden behind a small stone chapel, surrounded by a few people who mattered: Carla, Jace, Olivia's assistant who had become a friend, and Will's childhood best friend who flew in from out of state. Olivia wore a soft ivory dress with no label. Jace walked her down the aisle. I give you my loyalty, she said during her vows, not because you asked for it, but because you earned it. Will looked at her like she was the only thing he'd ever wanted. I give you a life, not perfect, not polished, but real. And yours. They built a quiet empire, together. Olivia remained CEO, but she took weekends off. Will's brand expanded, but he never let it take more than it gave. They traveled, cooked, fought about furniture choices, and danced in their kitchen barefoot. Jace grew up knowing love didn't mean perfection, it meant showing up. He called Olivia his bonus mom, and she never once missed a soccer game. Years later, on the balcony of a villa in Tuscany that Olivia surprised him with for their anniversary, Will watched her laugh with their daughter brown curls bouncing as she ran around her mother's chair. He turned to Olivia, took her hand and said, "You still make my whole world feel new." She leaned into his side. "That's because we never stopped choosing each other, and they never would."